statewide average to kind of give a, it's important, I think, before you discuss changes to understand what is. What is the way that funding is provided to the K through 12 system. And this bar chart kind of helps demonstrate the various streams of revenue that are available to a school district. Capital outlay receipts are levied against property taxpayers, and they're monies that are reserved for capital projects. You know, buy a bus, build a building, buy things, primarily. Now, currently, there is some relaxation of those rules under current law that is set to expire at the end of this year or next, I can't remember. And there's legislation being introduced, which I'm aware of, which will maintain that relaxation or expand it. I believe there's at least 2 or 3 different versions to allow more flexibility in the use of that money for more than things. For example, utilities, I know, is one relaxation of that rule. I'm trying to think of what some of the others are under the current law. But there's a variety of bills. Some expanded the available uses more, some not so much. Some simply just extend the current temporary flexibility law. So that's one represented by the top box, green on my chart. Then the second box is special ed receipts. Each school district will get some money, obviously, for special ed needs. If a school district finds that its special ed needs are greater than that, there's an emergency fund that the state has. The school district can apply for extra money. There's a committee that looks at the applications, and generally we've had enough money in that fund to meet the emergency needs when a school district has extraordinary special ed costs that are beyond what their typical receipts would cover. So that's a second block of money that they get. A third block is a very eclectic group of funds, and I didn't go through them, but I can give you some examples. Fines and penalties, I talked about that. Bank franchise taxes, if you have, like say your Dakota Bank, if their charter is based in Aberdeen, you might get a fair amount of the bank franchise tax paid by Dakota Bank, as an example. That would go to your school district. Let's see, I lost my list here. Here it is. Gross receipts taxes on electricity would be another example. So if you're a co-op member and you live in the Aberdeen School District or a different school district, part of the money you pay for electricity is like a sales tax on electricity. And that amount, a share of that money goes to the school district. Title I and II funds, those are federal funds that are given more. If you have more low-income students, you get more of that kind of money. Revenue from the Permanent Schools Fund, again, the school and public lands, when South Dakota was created, you know, each state had a certain amount of property that was set aside to help benefit schools. Jared Johnson manages that land, leases it out, and the lease payments are divided among the school districts. That's another stream of funding. Wind farm taxes. We changed our property tax system, the way we assess wind farms, at least twice in the last 8 years. We've changed how wind farms are taxed to make them more attractive to wind developers, and so they build more wind farms in South Dakota. And when you change the property taxes on something, you have to be aware that most property taxes go to schools. So when you fiddle with that formula, you don't want to hurt the schools. So when we changed that formula, the wind farms began being taxed in part based on their nameplate. So if you've got a 1.5 megawatt turbine, you say 1.5 times, or 1.5 megawatts would be 1,500 watts, kilowatts, times a certain percentage. That's how it's taxed, and a share of that goes to the school district. And receipts from co-curricular activities, you know, fees that come in when you go to the football game or something like that. So all those funds would be collected in this other general fund receipts. Now, the reason you break these out is because they are what's called outside the formula. The school funding formula, and forgive me if this is all well known to you, but most people don't have the time to learn how it works. The school funding formula is designed to equalize the funding per student across the whole state. So, for example, traditionally, property taxes, prior to 1995, property taxes was the main way that schools got their money to operate. The problem with that is you have some school districts that don't have a lot of valuable property. They're either very small, land mass is very small, or even if they have a larger land mass, the property within that mass is not valuable as compared to many others. So you look at Faith School District, which is both small and doesn't have a lot of very valuable property. They can't get much out of property taxes. And the state sets a ceiling of how much you can assess. And if my BlackBerry battery was working, I could tell you what those ceilings are. But the state only allows property taxes to be assessed to a certain level. If you want to assess above that, you have to opt out and get the voters' permission to tax more than that. Up to that level, the school board can drive it. But even if Faith taxed to the maximum, they still would not have enough money from their property taxes to have $4,804 per student, and that's the per student formula amount right now. So South Dakota says, well, how much can Faith generate through the maximum levies? And then they contribute enough so that sum, when divided by the number of students in the Faith School District, equals $4,804 per student. So if you've got a very rich district, say like Dakota Valley in the Dakota Dunes area, or Sioux Falls is pretty property tax rich, Harrisburg is pretty property tax rich, the state might not contribute much to them because property taxes can do most of it. If it's poor, then they contribute what they can and the state contributes more. In the end, everybody gets that $4,804 per student. Those bottom two blocks represent that formula. Some school districts get a lot of money in the top three blocks. Some school districts don't get a lot of money in the top three blocks. So these are outside the formula. And so when we talk about a 10% cut, we're talking about a 10% to the formula funding. These bottom two blocks, not the top three. They're not going to get a cut of their capital outlay receipts. They're not going to get a cut of their special ed or other general fund receipts. The 10% only impacts the bottom two blocks because those two blocks collectively, statewide, represent $4,804.65 or 60 cents per student. And as you see, some of that is state money, that's black, that's the gray, and some of that is blue. And you can see the state actually pays a little better than half. We pay 57? Almost 57%, and local school districts with their property taxes at the maximum levy are paying about 43%. And we adjust every year to maintain that balance. So the state pays, when I first became lieutenant governor, we were paying 52%, 53% in there. Now it's gone up because the state over that last 8 years is putting more money into education than the formula really originally provided. But the cut, because it's a 10% cut to those two blocks, is in part a cut to property taxes and in part a cut to what the state will pay. And so it'll have property taxes go down because property taxpayers won't be paying, 43% of that, 4.3% of the 10, and we won't be paying 5.7 as a part of the 10, if you follow me.
So the property tax